So I'm super excited today to share with you the second class in a series that I have developed for beginner bag makers. And it is designed as a skill builder, so building from one lesson to the next. So I want to encourage you that if you are intimidated by sewing and much less bag making, to really work your way through this series, because before you know it, you will be more advanced, more comfortable, and more confident with your sewing skills. So don't be intimidated by your novice status. We all start somewhere, and we're going to go through this super slow, and I'll explain it to where I think you'll feel very comfortable. You'll get a few of these zipper pouches under your belt, and then it'll be second nature to you. If we haven't met yet, my name is Rebecca. Welcome to Laugh Sew Create, where I give you tips and tricks for learning how to sew. If you're able to sew a straight line, video number 1 is where I go over how to make a foundation pouch, and it has tabs and a zipper. It is basically a two-dimensional flat pouch. This class is where you take it from the two-dimensional aspect and add more of a three-dimensional pouch aspect. And that is super exciting when you're first starting out, because you really feel like you've accomplished something when you've moved up from this to this. We're going to use the same exact bag pattern that I have made available to you for free on the first class. And there is a purpose for that. By keeping it the same exact cutting dimensions, you see what tweaks and changes can be made to actually make it into this three-dimensional structure. I have prepared some panels. Instead of going through the whole process I did in this tutorial, I have partially assembled the bag. So up until this point, everything's the same as in the first class. But from this point forward, we're going to go through and show you how we add that three-dimensionality to the pouch. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about the construction of how this comes about. So when you go to a three-dimensional pouch, some of the things that you're doing is you're taking this pouch and you are squaring off the bottom. The pouch gets shorter, right, because it accounts for the extra fabric that you have to account for in the bottom. So anytime that you're making a pouch, and as you grow your wings and start making some patterns on your own, and you can actually decide, well, I want to make this a deeper zipper pouch, then you'll know that when you do that and you want to box it, then you need to make sure that you're accounting for what will be taken up in this component. The second thing to understand that I didn't know when I was starting out is when you box the corners, there are so many different methods to boxing the bag. There are different methods in just achieving this look. There are also different boxing techniques that give you slight changes in the appearance of the bottom of the bag. So if you're planning on making multiple pouches, you can use the pattern that I have given you in the download, and I'll link it down below. But you can use the clear chopping mats to make templates. That way it's a lot easier to trace and cut, or you can use your rotary cutter, but I find it's easier to just trace these out and then cut it with the scissors. I made one for the interfacing as well, which gets cut a little bit smaller. I have a variety of the squares that I use for boxing tote bags or handbags. So I have one that's 2 inches, 1.5, and 1 inch. During the first video where I tell you that we spread it open, looks like a butterfly, where you have the 2 exterior panels, and then you also have your lining and the zippers facing up. This is the point where we're going to do the notching out of the corners. To get this effect on this bag, which I think is a nice depth for it, I'm going to use a 1 inch square. So you could also use your rulers, but if you're going to make a lot of them, it can be useful to make these little templates. So when you're making the 1-inch square, the depth's actually going to be double that. A 1-inch boxing is going to lead to a 2-inch depth. So if I used the 1.5, then your box would be obviously a lot wider at 3 inches and also a lot shorter. And there's a very irate crow outside my window, if you hear it. So you're going to place it in each of the corners and trace around. And you could do it either on the lining side or the exterior side. It doesn't really matter. I'm using a friction pen, which is a heat erasable marker. And then you're going to repeat that on all the other 3 corners. You want to make sure that you start with a nice crisp edges. So if you have, say, some of the lining poking out, you know, it's kind of wonky just because that happens when you're first starting out, then you can use your rotary cutter and ruler to get a nice straight edge. You guys hear that? Crow's got a lot to say. Today I had a beautiful northern flicker come to the bird bath. Okay, so then you'll just use your scissors and you're going to cut through the lining and the exterior fabric. And repeat for the other 3 corners as well. Grabbing some clover clips, we're going to pull the right sides together and pull the linings together. So you're kind of splitting it apart like so. At this point, you want to also make sure that you're opening up the zipper. So you have your little tabs here. You want to make sure that when you get the tabs, you get that nice kind of dome shape to go along with the zipper. In order to do that, you want to push the bottom part of that, the legs of that dome, so to speak, towards the lining side, sandwiching in that tab that's kind of a U-shaped, and you're going to clip it. And when you're starting out, you always want to use more clips. The more the better, because things shift. So now is the time to take it to the sewing machine, and you're going to start sewing on the exterior fabric, back stitching on this corner and going across to this edge and back stitching, and then starting back 3/8 of an inch in, sewing all the way across, back stitching, and repeating the process here, back stitching, coming to the opening, and then back stitching, and then jumping across and starting with a back stitch across, same thing, 3/8 of an inch and across all the way back down. So these portions where you cut out the square are going to be unstitched. Okay, so let's take a look at those 2 different methods. More traditional way of doing it, see this frequently, that is where you just back stitched and then started over on the other side of the notched corner, and when you go to box it, you kind of pull out the exterior fabric and you're going to get an arrow looking thing, and then the top's going to be flat as the goal, and you are going to line up those 2 seams, because you see, if you don't get them lined up here just right, then when you turn it, you're not gonna have a good product. So you want to make sure that those seams are perfectly lined up, and then you can proceed by sewing across. So let's go ahead and do that. And you can butterfly the seams, meaning you can have the seam allowance going one way and then the other one going the other way, so it doesn't get so bulky. Because if you had both of them going in the same direction, then you're going through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers of fabric. And this kind of helps also the seams nestle together. just like that. Another useful technique is you can splay them all open if you want your seams like that. And you can actually take a pin and put it in the seam, and then make sure that you're kind of lining it up with the other side, trying to line all your seams up so they're not going to shift, and pin it. As a beginner, I find this harder because I think you're dealing with all of this and then you've got a pin in it. I think that's a little bit harder. But again, you'll figure out which method you like. But it's good to know all of them because then you can practice. And when you're starting out and not knowing, sometimes you don't realize that there are multiple ways of achieving the same thing. And sometimes some methods work better for different people, or different methods work for different people. So you got to just try it out. Go straight across. In order to get this straight boxing, sometimes what will happen is you'll kind of do like a kind of a curved line, and then you won't get a nice crisp bottom. Back stitch. And you're coming off the edges. I like to put in a second row of stitching right next to that one because the bottom of the bag gets a lot of pressure on it, and so that the seams can start to gape. Trim that down so it reduces the bulk. On the next that. There you go. On this side, I'm going to show you a different method. Same result. A method in which you can get these seams to line up better on the corner is like that. Have your needle in the down position on the very edge. And then you're going to lift the presser foot up, and you're going to bring this over and kind of curl it about. Bring it to where it meets that seam, like so. And then put your presser foot down and keep going. Right, and because this is the lining side, I'm going to stop early and back stitch. That row of stitching, and we just kind of kept on going by bringing that together. What that does is going to make it a little strange looking, and it may feel strange at first. If you're not comfortable with this method, then do the method that I just showed you, because everything stays flat. In this method, this kind of pooches up. Where the advantage of this method comes in is when you go to open it like that, you're assured that that seam is already stitched in place. And so all you have to do is kind of butterfly your seam allowance. And then when you do the seam allowance, you always want to make sure that you're paying attention to which way you're folding it. So your other side wants to be folded the same way. So it kind of falls into place that way. And you have less of a chance of mismatching your seams. For this last method, you just leave off the part where you notch out the corners. You just leave the panels as they are, and you will pair it the same way, right sides together. And gonna clip them all the way around. So the zipper is open. I'm going to sew all the way around this, and then on this we still want to make sure that we're leaving a gap for the turning. So I've sewn all the way around except for I left the gap open. So you're going to grab the corners and you're going to make a arrow looking thing. And the goal here is to stack this seam on top of this seam. And once again, I like to use a pin because you're kind of flying blind on this method, and I think it's harder to get a consistent line up of the seam. And you're going to be sewing across, so you need to make a line or give yourself a line. I'm going to repeat that on all four corners. Cut the corners off. So at this point we can turn the bag right side out through the lining. And if you remember from the first lesson, this is called the birthing process in bag making. And you want to have your turning tool handy. Make sure that those are lined up well. Because if you need to, you could use the seam ripper and take the stitches out and start over again. So you just always want to check. I like using the long file. You'll get better every time you do it. And that's normal with anything, right, in life. And so it's pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. We're going to push the little tabs out. Just be gentle. You want to kind of get that nice right angle. So now we're going to push out, same thing, the lining. And you see your lines. Check your lines. Okay, and then at this point we're ready to you can either do a invisible ladder stitch, or you can sew it shut on the sewing machine. The invisible ladder stitch, then you don't see the sewing line, but it's kind of like I feel like the benefit is that when you're using a sewing machine, then you get a tighter stitch and your lining has less of a tendency to rip open, whereas the ladder stitch is done by hand, and sometimes if you don't get it really well, then it can open back up. And just check that you've caught both sides and it's sewn shut. Now your pouch is done. All that you have to do is take either I made all of these, like these tailor's hands, but if you don't have one of these, then you can use a wadded up washcloth or towel to get into those corners, and then use your iron and press it. Another thing is when you press it, you can also press it like this, flat, press it on both sides and get all those wrinkles from the turn.